all need an uplift. So my name is Kate. I'm the Senior Services Librarian and Art Coordinator here at the library. And I'm just going to talk about some upcoming events. Then I'll turn the microphone over to Richard Cox, who is coordinating today's Health Matters for Seniors program. Today is our second in the Health Matters series, and the other two that we have coming up are, one is on the resilience movement and the documentary about trauma and other things that impact health as one ages. The flyer is over on the table, and I'll just read to you a little bit about that program and tell you the date. So that's on Friday in the afternoon, on April the 12th. So I think that's about 2 weeks away, right? Andrew Bell, the psychologist from Westchester Department of Community Mental Health, will be here. So we're going to have a really stimulating discussion. I believe we'll be able to show most of the film, but not the entire movie, documentary. And then in May, we're going to have the Weill Cornell collaborative that I'm a member of and coordinator with, come to have a panel of several doctors, and we're talking about stress in the times that we live in, and a large discussion about that with fake news and horrible violence in synagogues and churches and shifting times that we're in. So that will be in May. I believe that's the 17th, and that one's in the morning. And you'll have a chance to be here and talk to a lot of the professionals in our community, the top folks. The Department of Mental Health will be here. I don't know if the Commissioner's going to be here, May Carpenter. We're hoping. And then some of the other programs that we have upcoming is the Art Talk series. We're going to be working with the American Archaeology Association, and the first one is coming up next weekend, Sunday, April the 7th. First feast with Dr. Natalie Monroe, all about how we lived in community, the foods that we ate, and how we celebrated life about 12,000 years ago. So that should be really interesting. And if you have not picked up the New York Times article that was published in December, it is on the table, all about medical marijuana with older adults, and the controversies, the data, and the statistics that are out, that I'm sure our speaker, Dr. Dara Wang, will talk about. So I'm going to change the microphone over to Richard Cox, who will introduce our speaker today.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, I'm Richard Cox. I'm the Managing Director of Team Unity Incorporated, and also the Director of CODE420 Events, who is partnering with this outstanding presentation today. We're thankful for the Greenburgh Public Library for partnering with us. You know, very much thanks out to Kate, who does a great job around here. And of course, you know, we do have some support today from Oxygen, and they're great sponsors and supporters out there. And of course, you're going to be hearing from you know, Dr. Dara Wang later on, and then we also have some words of presentation from ATN Health. So let's really jump right into the program, because that's what you guys are really here today. We're going to bring up ATN. ATN is a family-run, women-owned medical marijuana business committed to manufacturing clean, safe, and consistent medical marijuana products for the patients of New York State. ATN LLC is a registered organization providing medical marijuana products under the New York Compassionate Care Act, which was brought into form in July 2014 by Governor Andrew Cuomo. So Martha McDermott is here with us. She has over 20 years of experience in this field as a social worker and also an approved mediator. So let's bring up Martha McDermott from ATN LLC.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. How are you? I want to set the record straight. I haven't been in marijuana for 20 years. Because if you do the math there, you might wonder where I've been in marijuana for 20 years. And so, but Richard, I thank you, because you're right. He's gotten my bio from our company website. I am I am a certified social worker, and I work as the Director of Patient and Community Relations for one of New York's what is known as registered organizations, otherwise known as a medical marijuana company. We grow, we produce, and we dispense high quality, monthly replicated medicine, very highly regulated by the state of New York, by the Department of Health. We have our grow facility in Lake George, just a little north in the town of Chestertown. And we have 4 dispensaries in the state, one in Syracuse, one in Yonkers, one in New York City, and one in Kingston. Our product, Dr. Huang will talk a little bit more about the intricacies of how cannabis works as medicine forward with you. So I thought I'd spend a quick minute talking a little bit about the history of cannabis as medicine, very briefly touch on it, then talk a little bit about the program in New York State, how one registers as a patient, and the process. Not a very complicated one, but there are a couple steps. And then lastly, talking a little bit about our products, quickly touching on cannabis as medicine is a little different if you were familiar with marijuana, say from the 60s and 70s. I think you'll find today that the industry has changed and grown and become really a lot more professional, and I would say also a lot more pharmaceutically oriented, at least when you're talking about cannabis when used as medicine. Of course, there's a very strong recreational market or group of people who like to use recreationally as well. And you've probably been hearing in the news that the governor had introduced legislation alongside his budget or within his budget to make marijuana recreationally available in New York State. It does not look like that will happen. As of last night, there was officially a press release saying they have removed that legislation from the budget. And I think it's not a bad thing, because I think we could probably use some more time as a state to figure out where everybody lands. There's a lot of little intricacies when you're making such a big leap. But anyway, back to cannabis as medicine. The first recorded evidence of cannabis being used medically is in ancient China, 3000 BC, roughly, in Mongolia, to be precise. The Chinese saw cannabis as one of 50 essential herbs that they used in everyday living, both for underlying medical wellness, but also in the use of fiber, clothing, paper, and as an everyday source for many different substances. Along the course of 5,000 years in your mind, try to envision China into the Middle East, along the Silk Route, into northern China. It takes about 5,000 years for the herb to make its way across. And again, in the same way it was used in China, all across in those parts of the world, cannabis was seen as an everyday tonic. Some of the ways it was used was to calm nerves, to reduce inflammation. It helped with pain relief. It helped with nausea. Women used it often in ancient times for monthly menstrual issues, such as cramping and things like that. In the 1500s, cannabis makes its way across the channel into Europe via the Spaniards, who then bring it into Europe, and then from the 1500s to the 1800s, it sort of becomes, again, in that era of Europe history, a general everyday tonic. One physician in particular is given credit for making cannabis a very easy to source substance. When he went to India, he studied the epidemic the occurrence of the epidemic, and in tight populated areas such as the cities of India. And he found that among the 5 herbs that were constantly being used and looked to both for treatment as well as for prevention, again, underlying antioxidant properties, was cannabis. So he brings cannabis back to England, and he patents what I would say is the world's first commercially spread supplement, and it was called Squire's Extract. And Squire's Extract took off in Victorian England. It was the hit. Everybody loved it. It was a little blue bottle that was kept in your medicine cabinet of that day. And people would take it daily for certain ailments, and people sometimes would turn to it for treatment of different medical conditions. As you can imagine, it made its way across to the United States at that time, and again, embraced in our country. A legal substance, used every day by many. You'd start to see a change in the perception of cannabis in the 1930s. for complicated political reasons. This was the time of the Great Depression. There was a great migration of Mexican workers coming over from Mexico. The Dust Bowl, and you know, the climate change that made farming so challenging in our country was also happening in Mexico. And migrant workers were coming, and they were bringing with them this little herb that they enjoyed at the end of a very hard workday. And they called it marijuana. And many, many people in today's industry feel that marijuana has become somewhat, even in certain circles, a racist term, because it was immediately pinned as the scourge and the reasons behind all of the problems that was happening at that time in our country. First blaming, of course, the migrant workers, and then this herb that they brought, they're making them all lazy, they're making them all angry, they're making them all crazy, and you all may have heard of a film that was produced at that time called Reefer Madness, and if you've ever seen it, it just depicts people running through the streets crazy, lunatic, out of their minds, and it was a lot of propaganda. But it succeeded, and in 1937, the Marijuana Stamp Tax Act was passed, and it essentially levied such a heavy tax on cannabis that people turned away from the idea of it as a tonic in your medicine cabinet. Remember, at the same time, the pill was being introduced. And so Tylenol, and really it was Bare aspirin in that day, really kind of supplanted the use of cannabis, and cannabis fell away. You see a rise in cannabis again in the 60s. At that time, you all might recall, there was a big popular movement towards many different drugs in the 60s and experimentation with those drugs. Cannabis was studied under the Nixon administration with the Schaefer Commission. You all might remember that. It's a 4,000-page document. Lots of money was spent on the document. Schaefer actually recommended that cannabis not be illegalized, that he felt it was a greater danger to the public to incarcerate people for the use and the possession rather than to allow them to consume. But President Nixon at that time was heartily against the drug. He saw hippies using it. He thought hippies were bad, and therefore he created the the Controlled Substance Act, you might know, and that put cannabis in a Schedule I position. And since that time, cannabis is as you've known it to be. Let me fast forward now to 1996, when in California, they decide, hey, we're going to use states' rights. California as a culture, a little bit more embracing of cannabis in general, in daily use, and so they say, we're going to push this, and we're going to pass medical marijuana as a state law. And that was really the first time you saw a shift in the wind. California went through some rough times. People opened dispensaries, and they were raided by the federal government left and right. You may or may not have read about that during the time. But California set a new precedent. Quietly and slowly, Washington and Oregon and Colorado and many West Coast states were joining along and becoming medical states. In 2000, and I think it was 12, Washington and Colorado go a step farther. They're going to test the waters now. We're looking at about 15 years later, right? They say so far so good, things are progressing along nicely, and they pass recreational marijuana laws. Again, state-oriented. You now have a real problem for the federal government. Obama felt the heat, and he said, I've got to do something. We have to take some kind of a measure. But it was a difficult moment for him because this was really a new frontier. You all may be familiar with the Cole Memorandum. At that time, Cole was the deputy, or rather assistant AG to Eric Holder. And Eric Holder asked Mr. Cole to please send out a memo to all of his deputies statewide, the sheriffs, associations, etc., saying, please don't prosecute businesses in cannabis that are operating following the state laws or the local municipalities' rules and regulations. And please just let them be, let them operate. We're not going to close them down, except for the following 8 conditions. And I don't want to bore you with the details, but I'll say it's everything that you would want it to be. It's no crossing state lines. It's no selling to minors. It's no funding drug cartels in other countries. It's not funding drug cartels in this country. And a little bit more benign after that. The Cole Memorandum allows for people to operate within their states, and that was passed in 2014, I believe. And so you see a nice falling away of restrictions, at least medically. 2014 was a year, as Richard said, that we passed the Compassionate Care Act here in New York State, allowing for the growth, production, and distribution of medical marijuana, and that's where we come in. We applied for a license at that time, we were awarded a license, and we've been open for 3 years since. We produce products that come, basically the way it works in New York State is a very pharmaceutical model, so there is no use of flour, there's only oil, which is extracted from the bud. In the same way you would extract wintergreen or lavender oil from those flowers. You do the same with cannabis. We take that oil and we do many things with that oil. One way that you've probably heard mentioned, it's a very, oh, I'm so sorry. Can I trouble you? Thank you so much. You've probably heard a lot of mention about tincture, and by the way, I don't have any product. This is all dummy.
Okay. I'm fine, actually.
No, I wouldn't dare put you all at legal risk. Anyway, this is a dropper. I hope you all can see it. I'll pass it around. Cannabis comes in oil form. We mix a little coconut oil with it to make it come out of the dropper nicely. The other forms that we have, maybe I'll just pass around this guy. If you like, sure. Another way that cannabis comes to you medically is through a spray, an oral spray. And this one's locked. But you can get the idea. It's a little bit like the old-fashioned Banaka blast. You open your mouth, and you spray it on the inside of your cheek, and that's called oral mucosal. And the other is sublingual. I don't know if you'd like to pass that around. A third way is via capsule, gel caps, just like you would purchase Advil. In the same way oil is put in the gel caps. Pass these around. And then lastly is a form that you may or may not be familiar with, called vaporization. Vaporization is like an e-cigarette. It's a battery, and what you do is you sorry guys, here we are. Take a cartridge that is filled with cannabis oil, and you screw it onto your battery, which has been charged in your wall. And in this little vaporization pen, you have a heating coil. And when you press down the button, you are lighting the coil. And you inhale, and you're pulling the oil over the coil, and you're creating vapor. Vapor is a lot healthier for you to inhale than combustion. Combustion, when you combust the flower, you're releasing tar and other toxins, and that's just not so good for you. But vapor is, you know, a lot of people, for example, come to us with asthma concerns. In certain cases, believe it or not, vape is actually recommended because the CBD in the oil helps to relax the asthmatic condition, to the anti-inflammatory properties. I mean, we wouldn't go there as an immediate recommendation, but it's an interesting thing to note. So if you want to pass that around. And then lastly, I wish I had it today, but sadly someone stole it from one of my other presentations. We have powder at Etain that I'm proud to share with you. That we've developed a powder. We're the only ones that carry it at this time. It is a water-soluble powder. Its base is a beet sugar. It's called isomalt. And we take our cannabis powder, oil, and we make it into a powdered form, and we mix it with the beet, and you can put it in your tea and your soup and your coffee. We recommend a warmer fluid is a little bit more, it dissolves a little more easily, but it's a lovely way to ingest your medicine. And I know Dr. Wong will talk to you more about onset of action and how long each country.
Forced cannabis.
Borscht. It's a borscht cannabis. So it's a beets, that's right. Okay, and then lastly, I want to quickly touch on, did I go over my time? Oh, good. 54 seconds. I'm good. Okay. I quickly want to touch base on how to register as a patient. Doctors like Dr. Wong are certified by the state of New York. They, also Dr. Paradnik here in the audience. Say hello, Lynn.
Stand up, Dr. Lynn.
There you go. We're very proud of all the doctors in New York. There are over 2,000 doctors who are currently certified, and we consider them trailblazers, and in many cases quite courageous, because there's not always support in the physician community for what we do. And the more people that are willing to come out and say that they believe in cannabis as medicine on a physician level, the more powerful the program is able to grow. I work in community and patient relations. There's a lot of interest. I look around this room, I see how many of you are here. It's wonderful, it's inspiring. I go to certain conferences and the doctors just walk on by. And it's a little frustrating. So again, to our physicians, with gratitude for your work. I have a pamphlet that I'm going to pass, again, just like we did with the sample products. Sorry about it, thank you so much. This describes how you register. You will find a certified physician if your own physician is not certified. You can do that through the Department of Health website. There's a big purple box that pops up when you go on the medical marijuana program, and it says find a certified physician. Once you find a physician, you visit with the physician. Also, you can do what's called telemedicine. You may or may not be familiar. You can do a video consult, and there are companies that specialize in doing that. Either way, you then receive a recommendation. And with that recommendation, you can now apply, or rather register with the Department of Health, and they'll send you a card in the mail. Until your card comes, you can download a temporary ID, and that will allow you to come see us the very same day you see your physician. And that's all you need, those two things, the recommendation and the card. You come see us, and our pharmacists who are highly trained, extremely experienced. A little baptism by fire, because there wasn't a whole lot of information around what we do and how we do it. Again, remembering New York State embraces a little more of a pharmaceutical model than the Western states, who are a little bit more of a blend of using cannabis as medicine and recreational. But in New York State, our pharmacists are very well trained, and we have pharmacy technicians who equally are as trained and are very helpful. And then all of us in patient relations at the corporate level, we're there to answer your questions. There's 4 women that I work with, I'm proud to work with. They're very well informed and very kind. We take great care of Etain for being compassionate, very patient. We understand this is brand new to everybody. And I know in our senior population that we work with, there's a lot of concern. A lot of people come to us for pain and for sleep issues. And there's a lot of concern. One of the first things I hear from many seniors that I work with is, I don't get high. I don't do this. I am not a stoner. I am not a drug addict. And I want to relieve any concern that anyone in the room may have around that. That is an old-fashioned view of things. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time and give you over to the good doctor.
How have you guys found out about this event through Facebook? Anybody found out the event through Facebook? No one. Anybody found out about this event through Meetup? No one. Anybody found out this event through Eventbrite? No one. Library, the Greenburgh Public Library. Yes, about the end, the Greenburgh Public Library. So great. So we now know that the Greenburgh Public Library, in its dedication to the population here in Greenburgh and the surrounding communities, that we know if we need to put on another event here, which we shall, we'll do make sure we market it stronger through the Greenburgh Public Library. And we thank you guys for coming out here once more today.